20 minutes into Hurry Up Tomorrow, and I was ready to go on YouTube and be the contrarian of this movie. I was ready to sing this movie's praises. I was ready to defend The Weeknd, say that this was all just fallout from The Idol that people didn't like, and that they were still clowning on him for that, but that this movie actually had a lot of artistic integrity, good direction, great cinematography. I was basically ready to carry water for The Weeknd. And then I saw the rest of the 80 minutes of this movie, and my God, it falls off a cliff. And I want to talk about this today because Hurry Up Tomorrow is definitely not a good movie, but there are good elements in it that I think are worth talking about. And also, it's really important to talk about the ego in the way of this movie, which is ultimately the reason this movie, Hurry Up Tomorrow, doesn't work. And it's because of the ego of The Weeknd. But I have this, I would say, casual relationship with The Weeknd. I like a good amount of his music, but I'm definitely not a diehard fan. 2015, Beauty Behind the Madness, like that album came out right before my senior year of high school. I remember The Hills. I remember Can't Feel My Face always being on the radio at that time. I then remember like 2016 Starboy. I then remember seeing him in Uncut Gems, and then After Hours Blinding Lights was such a huge deal when it came out. Like, I remember consuming that and being a fan of his just kind of casually. I remember his Super Bowl performance. I didn't listen to Dawn FM. I didn't watch The Idol. I haven't really listened to Hurry Up Tomorrow, the musical companion album to this. And here's how casual of a fan I am. I didn't even know his name was Abel until seeing this movie. So, like, I definitely have an appreciation and respect for the music of The Weeknd and have consumed it casually over the past decade. But I'm not this diehard fan. And I will have to admit, for the first 20 minutes or so of this movie, I was in. For the first 20 minutes, it's really just a concert film of The Weeknd's music with some great pulsating sound. I saw this in a very loud theater that I found exciting. It was a well-shot concert film with The Weeknd doing what he does best, which is performing. And when it is a performance act that he is doing as a singer, as something that he can tap into just naturally, I found this movie kind of electric and I was really into it. It also helps that the cinematography of this film is beautiful. It comes from Chase Irvin. He has done some incredible cinematography work over the past decade. Some of you might know him from Beyonce's Lemonade. Others of you who are more movie aficionados might know him from Spike Lee's Black Klansman. He did the Marilyn Monroe disaster movie in 2022, Blonde, but even though that movie is awful, the cinematography of that movie is incredible. Irvin, as a cinematographer, has a real talent for capturing ferocity and capturing singular visions, which this movie for the first 20 minutes has. And even throughout, as the movie starts to fall apart, the cinematography of this movie is often stunning. That's also largely accompanied by Trey Edward Schultz, who is the director of this movie. Some of you might know him from It Comes at Night or Waves, which came out in 2019. He is a director that does very personal, small-scale stories, and I've always thought has a very strong singular vision that he is able to convey to his cinematographer very well. All of his movies are well shot, well compositioned, and this movie is no exception. So when we're in the beginning part of this movie, I was like, wow, I'm really liking it. I'm really liking this vibe. I really like the concert atmosphere of this movie, and it's really working for me. And we're introduced to three characters during this time, the three characters that will follow throughout Hurry Up Tomorrow. It is Abel, it is his manager played by Barry Keoghan, and then we are also following an obsessed bipolar fan played by Jenna Ortega. The exact second this movie stops becoming a concert film, that's when I noticed the wheels starting to fall off on this movie. And that's really where my praises of this movie largely stop. It just becomes a mess from here, and there's just nothing particularly memorable for an hour stretch of this movie. There is good stuff that bookend this movie, but the middle is just kind of a disaster, and it's largely due to us following The Weeknd, who just doesn't have the capability of being a frontman for a movie. This movie is essentially the plot of Misery. Jenna Ortega meets The Weeknd. They hook up. She quickly becomes obsessed. He is about to leave her. She doesn't let him. The point of this movie and the meat and potatoes of this movie is this kind of Misery-like kidnapping story that we don't get to till the very end. I don't think that plot really starts getting developed until the last 40 minutes of this movie. And that is also just a huge problem when nothing of the middle is memorable. I'm racking my brain to kind of try and remember what happens in the middle act. If I'm correct, it's essentially Abel is being stressed out from the tour. He's kind of becoming self-destructive. He's not able to sleep. He's crashing out all the time. He has this kind of disaster performance, which then leads him to meeting the Jenna Ortega character backstage. It's not memorable. Like, it is just incredibly dull for a good 40 minutes of this movie. Ortega comes in, there's a little bit more juice in it. The issue that comes is in a movie like this where we are kind of doing Misery, we have The Weeknd instead of James Caan. And we are replacing suspense that Stephen King builds up in Misery as the author of that original book. We're now replacing it with self-importance, which is a huge issue with this movie. This is a movie destroyed by The Weeknd not knowing what he can and cannot do well. Let me say what he can do well. He is a good performer. He is a very capable singer. He is able to hold the camera steadfast in a performance. He is somebody that I think is good looking. He is somebody that can have a kind of natural buddy chemistry that he does pretty well with Barry Keoghan in this movie. There are things that he is able to do. He has that presence as a musical star. And I think this movie, when it's able to tap into that, that's when the movie is good. What The Weeknd cannot do is he cannot play pained, tortured artist. He just can't tap into that emotion in this movie. He is unable to display that as a performer. And it's such a huge problem in this movie. He has basically most of the dramatic beats in this movie, and I don't think he really delivers on one. There is one really exaggerated scene where he is just yelling at, I believe it's the Ortega character.
And stand by and let you hurt yourself because I care about you too much, and I just want to help you, Abel.
Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up! Shut up!
The issue with The Weeknd is he's just yelling in this scene. It's not acting, it's just yelling, and that's the difference. A trained actor can give emotion to that scene. He doesn't have that. He doesn't know how to process that. This is a film that is the fundamental issue of the writing. He is telling you what these characters are feeling. He is telling you what's going on. He cannot write a real character. This is a movie about true tortured spirits, because the film tells us that. It's not because they're actually real tortured spirits. They're just constantly telling us that is what's going on with them. I think generally what this movie is trying to be is I think it's trying to be a nightmare of Abel's, where you almost have true manifestations coming out in Barry Keoghan and Jenna Ortega. Barry Keoghan represents the ego. This is the person who's telling him he's basically a god, that he's basically Superman. He is the one inflating The Weeknd. And then you have the Ortega character that is supposed to represent guilt, manifesting in a relationship that he had with a woman that went wrong. And I think that's what this movie is supposed to be. They are both literal characters in this movie, but I think they are supposed to represent something figurative that The Weeknd is working through. This movie doesn't make any attempt to really say that. That's just kind of what I'm inferring, what is trying to be told through the visual storytelling of this movie. What he can do that Abel does well is he is able to talk about himself. And that obviously is a very egotistical thing to say about somebody, but he is really captivating when he's, talking about his work, when he is talking about his art. Maybe it's just because I actually am impressionable when it comes to that. I do like artists explaining their art. I do find it quite fascinating when someone's breaking down the inspiration, the thematic weight of what they are making. And honestly, I kind of think this movie needed a little bit more of it. It's just the ego of The Weeknd is misused to horrible effects. He is not knowing how to utilize it. He should not have written this movie. He should not have been the leading star of this movie. And he probably shouldn't have produced this movie because he puts himself at the focal point of everything in this movie. He's just juggling too much. But here is what he is able to capture in this movie. Here is what he is able to do. He is able to speak on the existence of himself, and those present the best moments within Hurry Up Tomorrow. There is a scene where Jenna Ortega is essentially explaining the music of The Weeknd to The Weeknd. It is a 10-minute sequence where she sings and dances to Blinding Lights and Gasoline. She is explaining the beauty of these songs, their themes, their emotions. It is metatextually a scene where Ortega is delivering a spot-on analysis and breakdown of the music of The Weeknd to The Weeknd. It is a script written by The Weeknd, by the way. The Weeknd is having Jenna Ortega essentially mansplain his music. It's such a self-important scene, and Jenna Ortega nails the tone and delivery of this scene. She's actually quite good throughout this movie. This movie needed more moments of that, and that's the key focal point of my thesis of what went wrong with this movie. The Weeknd should not have been the star of this movie. He needed Jenna Ortega to spearhead this movie. He needed her to be at the forefront because she is capable of delivering on this movie. She is a capable actress able to be the leading woman in a movie. The Weeknd needed to have a smaller supporting role in this movie. He can be in this movie, and I think it could be really impactful if he was in this movie, but the story arc and the attention of this film needs to not be on him. It needs to be on Ortega. Imagine if Hurry Up Tomorrow, instead of being from the perspective of Abel, was told entirely through the perspective of Jenna Ortega's character of an obsessive fan of The Weeknd who seduces The Weeknd and then kidnaps him. And the only times we see Abel throughout this film are during the concert scenes, their meet cute / seduction scene, and then the kidnapping. Imagine if he was supporting Jenna Ortega in this movie, if he was putting her over, if he was giving her the credibility to star in this movie and make a movie about the artist, The Weeknd. That is a far more interesting, far more rewarding movie. Being an actor is a skill of listening and reacting. The best actors are able to, yes, put themselves forward and even take the leading role, but they are also able to make everyone around them better. They make everybody shine. Abel, at this point of his career, is not able to do this. Instead, he has to be the center of attention. He is kind of a selfish presence in this movie. He is giving Jenna Ortega nothing to work with in this movie. And that is the issue of the self-obsessed. The self-obsessed puts himself at the center of this movie and makes a movie about himself. And that's the reason this movie is a failure. The Weeknd cannot be the focal point of this movie, and he is. He is unable to carry that burden, and it's the reason this movie is ultimately a failure, even if there are elements that I would recommend. I didn't personally hate watching this movie, but it is a dull movie, and it is a movie that just becomes worse and worse the longer it goes on, and it's honestly, the most shocking thing about it is it's an hour and 45 minutes and it feels about half an hour too long. That is a huge fundamental issue that this shows that this movie is unable to center a film around its protagonist of The Weeknd. And that's why I am giving Hurry Up Tomorrow 2 out of 5 stars. So thank you everyone who watched my review of Hurry Up Tomorrow. Let me know in the comments if you agreed or disagreed with my thoughts. To anyone defending / liking this movie, tell me what you liked about this movie in the comments below. And to everyone hating on this movie, sound off in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching this video, and make sure to subscribe for more.